Yo, what's going on, guys? Seth Spartan here, nutrition, training, and hormone expert and Prometheus Pro bodybuilder with Prometheus HRT, the world's best testosterone and hormone replacement clinic. Use my code Spartan to save on either testosterone or HGH replacement therapy or peptides or Anavar, Anadrol, and the list goes on as long as you qualify. Guys, without any further ado, this is Ipamorelin unleashed like you've never heard it before. Guys, we're going to go through all the pros, unbiased, uncensored, absolutely everything you could ever want to know. From there, we're going to jump on over into the cons. Again, unbiased, uncensored, absolutely everything you could ever need to know. From there, we're going to go down into dosage, talk about dosing, talk about medical dosing. We'll talk about what I'm doing because Ipamorelin is the peptide that I currently use. And then we're going to go into any extra additional information that people just either plain or simple don't talk about to begin with, or they don't know in the first place. So guys, without any further ado, this is Ipamorelin Unleashed. I'm Seth Spartan. Here we go. Ipamorelin Unleashed, starting with the pros. Ipamorelin is a powerful, and by powerful, I mean powerful. Ipamorelin is a powerful GHRP, growth hormone releasing peptide. So what does this mean? This means that Ipamorelin is in the same class as GHRP6, GHRP2, hexarelin, and then yes, Ipamorelin also falls into this class. So GHRP, by nature or by description, is what? What's a GHRP? Growth hormone releasing peptide, and Ipamorelin fits this to the T. All right, moving on. So GHRPs and also Ipamorelin is a what? Moving on. Ipamorelin is a ghrelin mimic. What are ghrelin mimics? Well, guys, to understand what a ghrelin mimic is, you need to know what ghrelin is in the first place. For those of you that don't know, ghrelin is a hormone which is secreted by your stomach in response to fasting or emptying. Think about when you wake up in the middle of the night and, maybe you didn't eat enough the day before. You wake up in the middle of the night, your stomach is wrenching. You wake up starving, hungry, stomach squeezing. That's ghrelin, okay? So basically, after being fasted for a period of time or after strong stomach emptying, what will happen? The cells of the stomach will produce and secrete a hormone called ghrelin. From there, it's going to travel, enter the bloodstream, hit the pituitary gland, and activate what? Ghrelin receptor sites, which will then kick out growth hormone from the pituitary gland. Now, this is great, but there's some problems with your body's natural synthetic ghrelin in terms of using this for growth hormone release. So what happened was scientists saw the ghrelin mechanism. Again, the reason that the ghrelin mechanism exists is for what? To supply the body with growth hormone, thereby supplying the body with calories when there's no food coming in, and also to initiate almost a starvation mechanism or a starvation mode. You're not taking in enough calories. Ghrelin by nature are going to release growth hormone, but it's going to make the body more likely to hold on to fat, spike up prolactin and cortisol and some other nasty things, and also lethargy. And we're going to get into this in the cons, and I'm sure later in this video. Having said that, this has to be said, and this is the next pro, moving down in the pros. As far as Ipamorelin, there are no cons in terms of those negative side effects from ghrelin. What do I mean? GHRP6, GHRP2, both have negative cons still left over from ghrelin. Why? Because they are the earlier attempts at making powerful growth hormone releasing peptides based off of ghrelin. The scientists, however, got this pretty much dead on perfect with both what Ipamorelin and hexarelin by basically removing the negative cons such as the starvation mechanism from Ipamorelin and hexarelin. However, this starvation mechanism, talking about fat storage effect, lethargy, and also hunger, still being with GHRP6 and GHRP2. GHRP2 is less than GHRP6, but it's still present. We're going to get into that more. However, with Ipamorelin and hexarelin, these negative cons of regular synthetic ghrelin are what? Removed pretty much completely from Ipamorelin or Hexarelin. We're going to talk about how the later classes of growth hormone releasing peptides, again, such as Hexarelin and Ipamorelin, are by far the most superior. Moving on in the pros. Oh, a lot to talk about already. All right, guys. 2-hour half-life when administered sub-Q. Has to be said with Ipamorelin. 2-hour half-life when taken sub-Q. So now what does this mean? In comparison to other peptides, GHRP6, GHRP2, for example, we'll start with those two because they have a very close half-life. With GHRP6, GHRP2, we can see that when compared to a drug like, or a growth hormone releasing peptide such as Ipamorelin, what? The half-life is way longer. We're talking about a 2-hour half-life, guys, taken sub-Q. Some people it's going to be a little longer, some people a little shorter, depending on things like, blood flow, how vascular that person is, what kind of shape they're in, metabolism, but right around 2-hour half-life for Ipamorelin when administered sub-Q. Now, what do we have to talk about when comparing this to GHRP6, GHRP2? We see right away the half-life is greater. It is far longer than GHRP6 and definitely much longer than GHRP2. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Quick answer. In most cases, this is a good thing. What do I mean by that? GHRP6, GHRP2 are both rapid half-lives and is going to basically give a very powerful, potent binding to the pituitary gland, spike up levels of that hormone very fast in the bloodstream. Ipamorelin, for that matter, is what? It's much longer of a half-life, meaning what? Less desensitization when being used. However, you still can only use Ipamorelin for maximum effect one time per day. We're going to get into dosing, we're going to get into medical dosing, and we're going to get into why once a day usage with GHRP6, GHRP2, Ipamorelin, Hexarelin, why one a day pulsing is still the best by far. Make sure you stick around for that because most people don't understand this, unfortunately. So anyways, moving past the half-life, moving on to the pros. Ipamorelin. Oh, this is a fun one, guys. Ipamorelin is Ipamorelin is my favorite growth hormone releasing peptide. I'm also going to tell you guys why at the end of this video. Moving on. Ipamorelin is a fourth class or fourth generation growth hormone releasing peptide. What do I mean by that? I mean Ipamorelin is very advanced when talking about growth hormone releasing peptides. Advanced compared to what? Ipamorelin is extremely powerful, extremely advanced in terms of what? Huge bang for buck, huge on the reward to risk ratio. When we're talking about GHRPs, GHRP2, or GHRP6, GHRP2, even Hexarelin, Ipamorelin is going to give greater reward per cons, okay? What do I mean by this? Typically, guys, when we're talking about drugs, whether we're talking about GHRPs, whether we're talking about anabolic steroids, whether we're talking about drugs in general, usually the later class something is, or the later class, the later generation drug it is usually better and better by a lot. What happens is basically the scientists that are attempting to create whatever drug basically do what? They are able to make more and more and more better tries and use the research they had from the previous attempts to make a drug more specific, more honed in, and altogether make it better across the board. This is absolutely the case with Ipamorelin being one of the latest or later growth hormone releasing peptides. Remember, scientists started with your body's natural ghrelin. They were able to make synthetic ghrelin identical to the one your body produces, and you could use that pretty much for stimulating growth hormone. But the problem is, one, you're going to get extremely hungry. You're going to be extremely tired after injection. So extremely hungry, extremely tired, and you're going to cause fat storage. And we know that this is still definitely, absolutely, without a doubt, the case with GHRP6, and still, to a decent amount with GHRP2. And that is why I will not use GHRP6 or GHRP2 unless, there's nothing to use besides those, unless, I was no longer able to get Ipamorelin through Prometheus HRT. Having said that, we have more advanced growth hormone releasing peptides like what? Ipamorelin and hexarelin. Both extremely advanced, but there's a big difference between the two regarding desensitization and how often you can use them. So I'm going to give you the cheat sheet. The best growth hormone releasing peptide that you can use in terms of infrequent use, we're talking 2 to 3 times a week, is going to be what? Probably hexarelin, in my opinion. Although you could do the same thing with higher dose Ipamorelin, but that's beside the point. Having said that, if you want to use a growth hormone releasing peptide every day, so what is the best in terms of, let's say, weekly? In terms of weekly, what is the best growth hormone releasing peptide? Hands down, without a doubt, Ipamorelin. Why? You're able to dose Ipamorelin and get a big, smooth, nice pulse almost every single day, 5 times a week. All right? Monday, Thursday off. We'll get into that in a little bit. So you're able to get more pulses. Think about getting a big pulse after your workout instead of being able to only get 2 or 3 with hexarelin because of the huge desensitization we see with this. With hexarelin. And again, you do have a little bit of desensitization with Ipamorelin, but nothing like hexarelin. Go watch my Hexarelin Unleashed video. I get into hexarelin down to the nitty gritty in detail, talking about everything. Moving on to the pros. This has to be said, giving credit where credit's due. Ipamorelin, huge pulse of HGH. And that's what we're all here for, isn't it? Ipamorelin, without a doubt, delivers a huge pulse of human growth hormone every single time. Granted, you're not taking this more than once a day or haven't been taking it for long periods of time. Now, why is this? We know, we're going to talk about pulse pattern in a second, but we know with Ipamorelin, it's tripping the same ghrelin receptor sites on the pituitary, which are responsible for big pulses of growth hormone. And at the same time avoiding the receptor sites in the brain, which activate the starvation mechanisms such as what? Lethargy, hunger, cortisol, and prolactin, right? So, but it has to be said, with Ipamorelin, there's a huge pulse of HGH, and it's going to be more like a shield volcano, and that's what we're getting into now. Moving on to the pros, pulse pattern has to be talked about. This is a fun one. With Ipamorelin, pulse pattern. Let's go. Here we go. Let's start with GHRP6. GHRP6 pulse pattern is going to look like this. All right, GHRP6. GHRP2, shorter half-life, more intense. GHRP2 is going to look like this. Altogether, more growth hormone release. Let's move now into hexarelin. Hexarelin is like dropping the nuke. Go watch my hexarelin video. Or watch my GHRP2 or my GHRP6 video, whatever you want. Anyways, hexarelin's going to look like, so let's just try this again. GHRP6, GHRP2. Ready for this? Hexarelin, like dropping the nuke. Of course, you can only drop the nuke 2 or 3 times a week. If you try to use hexarelin every single day, those pulses are going to look more like this. All right? Let's talk about Ipamorelin. Ipamorelin. Nice, still a big pulse, but a lot tamer. It's going to be more of a shield volcano, all right? This is what you have with Ipamorelin, and this is the pulse pattern. It's a large single pulse, kind of rounded like a shield volcano, if you ever took geology or any classes like that. So that's what the pulse pattern is going to look like, and that is the comparison between the other growth hormone releasing peptides. Having said that, this takes us into our next pro. Here we go. What's the next pro? Ipamorelin. Growth hormone releasing peptide Ipamorelin. Huge, and by huge I mean huge, increases in HGH, IGF-1, muscle mass, and fat loss. Now, what's the first thing that sticks out to us? Large increases in HGH. Ipamorelin can be pulsed hard, heavy, every single day just about. You need to take 1 to 2 days off per week for resensitization purposes, in my professional opinion. And I agree with the doctors at Prometheus HRT. In my professional opinion, if you're dosing it hard every day, you need to take 2 days off per week. Think Monday and Thursday. Again, compared to Hexarelin, you can only dose this 2 or 3 times a week. And if you're using higher dosage of Hexarelin, you're dosing Hexarelin hard, 2 times is going to be the top. All right, we're talking about, again, desensitization. Go watch my Hexarelin video. I talk about how that Hexarelin binds the pituitary so hard that it desensitizes for long periods of time. And if you keep trying to use Hexarelin every day, your pulses will look like, basically like this, okay, like nothing. Anyways, huge increases in HGH. Again, you can pulse it almost every single day hard with Ipamorelin. Huge increases in IGF-1. All right? Huge increases in muscle mass. Why? Because you can use Ipamorelin either pre-workout or post-workout. I tend to switch between both. You're going to get a little bit of lethargy if you take it pre-workout, but I tell you one thing, it feels amazing. Absolutely amazing. So either pre or post for muscle gain. If you're going to, the only con of using it post, you got to wait to slam a bunch of carbs. We're going to get into that in a second in terms of, we're going to talk about the effect, the negative feedback loop carbs, blood sugar have on growth hormone releasing peptides, Ipamorelin included. Anyways, Ipamorelin, huge increase in HGH, huge increase in IGF-1, huge increase in muscle mass if it's used correctly. I know I've used it, pharmaceutical grade Ipamorelin now for quite a while. And also huge increases in, wait for it, fat loss. The fat loss part is important and interesting. We have to talk about this because with GHRP6, GHRP2, you do not have huge increases in fat loss. With GHRP6, medically speaking, in studies, you have pretty much no fat loss with GHRP6 or MK677, which is mislabeled as a SARM. Go watch my MK677 Unleashed video for information on that. So in terms of fat loss, you don't get huge increases with GHRP6. You don't get any fat loss with GHRP6 based on medical studies. You get a little bit with GHRP2, but fat loss is still being impaired because GHRP2 still trips your body's starvation mechanism a little bit. All right. So in terms of peptides, you're left with 2 best options: Hexarelin, Ipamorelin. In terms of if you're going to use something 2 or 3 times a week, Hexarelin is probably going to be the better option most of the time, arguably. If you want big pulses every day after your workout, just about, Ipamorelin by far is going to be the better option. Otherwise you could always use Ipamorelin at a higher dosage, 2 or 3 times a week to match basically Hexarelin. Doesn't really matter. You guys pick what you want to do. Moving on to the pros. Good safety rating, period. And by good, I mean great safety rating, all right? I have seen no serious sides or cons when talking about Ipamorelin or any growth hormone releasing peptide for that matter. Extremely safe. Why? Because they're based off of your body's natural ghrelin. And they're just binding those receptor sites. Now, when talking about growth hormone releasing peptides, Hexarelin probably by far being the biggest offender. With growth hormone releasing peptides, you can either take too much for the specific compound, or you can not be used to it in general. You can cause dizziness, face flushing, terrible hunger, lethargy, all these different things depending on what you use. But the bottom line is that the negative side effects we're talking about, such as, you're dizzy from the huge HGH release. Oh, you're a little disorientated. Oh, red face, flushing, red skin. These things are very, very minor side effects and they're short term. There's no real big danger with growth hormone releasing peptides. And even if somebody has pre-diabetes and you're increasing HGH level, that's going to increase their blood sugar. The thing is with this is that spike, that pulse, with ipamorelin or hexerelin arguably being the longer pulses, you're still, guys, really not increasing blood sugar anywhere near as long as if you were doing what? Taking synthetic HGH. So if you're pre-diabetic, I would stay away from this more. But even if you're pre-diabetic, I would argue you could use this under doctor supervision with really no issues. If it's done rightly. Again, talk to the Prometheus at HR. Talk to the doctors at Prometheus HRT if you want to know more about this, or use this with the prescription pharmaceutical grade like I do. Moving on in the pros. Let's talk about this. Ipamorelin. Oh, this is a fun point. Ipamorelin is the GOAT, the greatest of all time, along with hexerelin. The GOAT. Ipamorelin is the GOAT. So if you've watched already, Hexerelin Unleashed, you already know what I'm going to say. Ipamorelin and hexerelin are the two best growth hormone releasing peptides in existence anywhere in the world. All right? There are no better growth hormone releasing peptides that I am currently aware of better than ipamorelin and hexerelin in terms of HGH release to low or no cons. Again, scientists, it's a fourth class. Ipamorelin is a fourth class or fourth generation GHRP. It is honed in, man. The scientists dialed it down. It is honed in, and it is absolutely killer for growth hormone release, and all the negatives are basically removed. Hexerelin would be arguably a third class, but all of those negatives have still been pretty much removed with hexerelin as well. They're a little bit more prone. We have a little bit more we have a lot more desensitization, but regardless, it depends what you're trying to do here. But that has to be said, guys. These two peptides, Ipam and hexerelin, are the greatest of all time. That's it, guys, for the pros. We covered Ipamorelin Unleashed. Moving now into the cons. Again, everything you could ever want to know. Here we go. Cons. Now, we already talked about some of this stuff, but we're going to talk about it in detail now. First con with Ipamorelin, arguably the biggest con, low desensitization rate. Now, if you watched Hexerelin Unleashed, the first con was high desensitization rate. With Ipamorelin, you have a low desensitization rate, but here's the bottom line, guys, and we gotta dispel some myths here. Desensitization with Ipamorelin happens, 100% happens, absolutely. Period. Why? It's a ghrelin mimic. It's a ghrelin mimic, so you're still going to be hitting those receptor sites. Now, if you were taking 50 micrograms of ipamorelin every day, you could probably use it. The desensitization would be so small that it would reset day to day. But if we're using at dosages which we want to be for large HGH releases, we still have desensitization occurring. And that's why, 5 days a week with ipamorelin. We're going to get into this more in detail in a second. So ipamorelin, low desensitization rate when compared to other growth hormone releasing peptides, but it is still present. Why? It's still a ghrelin mimic, all right? And even though it's as advanced as it is. Number 2, carb and blood sugar effect. We have to talk about this. All right? And one last thing I wanted to say about low desensitization rate. If you don't understand why GHRP6 and GHRP2 cause fat storage, lethargy, or hunger, and also trip the body's starvation mechanism, you need to go and watch GHRP6 or GHRP2 Unleashed. I talk about this at length, why this is. If for some reason I didn't explain it well enough in this video, go watch those videos. Moving on. Carbon blood sugar effect. Now this, guys, is going to be with every single growth hormone releasing peptide, including MK677. Why we know in medical literature, medical studies, scientists said that GHRP6, the effects on the pituitary with GHRP6 are indistinguishable from MK677. The two compounds, even though they're molecularly different, they exert the exact same effects on the pituitary. so much so that they could not distinguish between MK and GHRP6. Now, why does this have to be said in the first place? Simply because I'm gonna include MK677 in this as well. This carb and blood sugar effect, whether it's GHRP6, GHRP2, Ipamorelin, Hexarelin, or MK677, all of them are prone to this effect. What is this effect? The carb and blood sugar effect. When you have higher amounts of blood sugar, when you have higher blood sugar, anything above baseline, depending on how much higher, it's a negative feedback loop on your pituitary gland to limit or suppress. It's like a governor, guys, like a governor in the car, to suppress how much growth hormone you can release. So it makes sense that you don't want high blood sugar when you are taking GHRP6, GHRP2, Ipamorelin, Hexarelin, MK677, all right? Again, you don't want that governor to limit how big your pulses are getting. And this is very important because people don't understand this. Now, having said that, people go the other way and they say, you can't eat at all when you take growth hormone releasing peptides, including Ipamorelin. That's not true, guys. That's not true at all. You can absolutely eat anytime, before, after, whatever you want, as long as, one, you're not eating a ton of carbs, you're keeping carbs low, no simple sugars. Hopefully you know what a simple sugar is. No simple sugars and no high amounts of carbs. You want to be keeping them low. Low means low. As for fat shouldn't be super high either, but you can eat some fat. It's not a big deal. So low carbs, low fat. You can eat as much protein as you want though. So think about this. You can have a few eggs. You can have a lean steak. You can have, whatever, a protein shake. In fact, I would argue, this is where I disagree with the doctors at Prometheus HRT. I would argue we know, anatomically, based on your body's physiology, that when you increase amino acids in the bloodstream, what happens? That also lets that governor off, basically, on the pituitary to do what? Amino acids increase in the bloodstream. When that happens, growth hormone is secreted. Growth hormone levels increase in response to higher amino acids in the bloodstream. So we could deduce then that, like the doctors, again, at Prometheus HRT, and pretty much any doctors or scientists would say, oh, well, you can't eat when taking these peptides at all right? That's what they're going to tell you, be fasted. But based on what we know on the human body, let's just think for a second. Common sense. We know in the human body, amino acids increase from a high protein meal. This increases HGH release from the pituitary. So I could argue, I could theorize that if you take these peptides with a protein shake or, lean steak, lean whatever, it's going to increase how powerful this pulse is. That would be my argument. But again, in studies, they haven't tested this. So doctors and scientists are going to stick to what they know. I'm not telling you to not do what your doctor's saying, but this is something to talk to him about. All right. So again, do everything safely, legally through your doctor under doctor's supervision. But this is my professional opinion on the matter. Moving on. All right. We got to talk about this. No boost to natural pulses. Moving in the cons. With Ipamorelin, Hexarelin, well, you might have this effect a little bit with Hexarelin because of the very long half-life. And you might have it a little bit with Ipamorelin as well. However, I have not seen the medical literature, but my professional recommendation or my professional opinion would be that you do see a small boost to natural pulses with what? Ipamorelin and Hexarelin. Why? Because we see it without a doubt with MK677. So let's just talk about MK677 real quick in case people haven't watched MK677 Unleashed. MK677, I already told you guys, in scientific studies, is indistinguishable with mechanism of action on the pituitary as GHRP6. MK, GHRP6 act the same on the pituitary gland. Indistinguishable. They can't tell them apart. Scientists can't. We know that it's proven MK677 does what? Because of the long half-life, think about 4 to 6 hours. It's not 24 hours. Go watch my video again. Bad information. It's not a 24-hour half-life with MK. It's 4 to 6 hours, up to 7 hours. But anyways, with MK677, we know, based on medical studies, that MK because of that long half-life, what happens? Because of that long half-life with MK, not only does it give you, let's talk about the pulse pattern too, not only does it give you a pulse, but since it gives you a pulse, but then when it's going down, it still amplifies other pulses. So you get a growth hormone pulse with MK, just like GHRP6, no different. You get a pulse, but then it's also going to amplify your body's natural pulses. MK will. Why? Because the long half-life is also still acting on the pituitary gland, all right? So MK is a hybrid pulse pattern. I should have probably talked about this earlier. Having said that, we're talking about it now. But MK677 is a hybrid pulse pattern, unlike the other pulse patterns we talked about. So MK does what? Creates a pulse and boosts your body's natural pulses. We talked about this. Having said that, GHRP6, GHRP2 are not going to boost your body's natural pulses. The half-life's short. However, we could argue with hexarelin, based on the research I see, hexarelin, anywhere from 2 to 4 hour half-life with hexarelin. My guess would be around 3 hours. But hexarelin, longer half-life. Ipamorelin, 2 hour half-life. I have not seen the medical research to indicate this, but I would argue, my professional opinion is what? That hexarelin and ipamorelin are also going to boost natural pulses to some degree, much like MK677 has proven. So, however, having said that, with no boost to natural pulses, I would say it's not that significant whether it boosts natural pulses or not. Why? Because compared to those big spikes with Hex or IPAM, the boosting of natural pulses is not going to be that significant when talking about total growth hormone release. Moving on to the cons. Let's talk about cortisol and prolactin, and then we're going to talk about dosages. With cortisol and prolactin, why do you have cortisol and prolactin release to begin with growth hormone releasing peptides? It comes back to ghrelin again. Ghrelin is your body's starvation hormone, so to speak, okay? It's your hunger hormone. Again, it's secreted by the stomach in times of fasting or emptying. So what does this mean? Ghrelin initiates a big pulse of growth hormone and also trips what? Your body's starvation mechanism. We talked about fat storage, hunger, lethargy. Among those, we have cortisol and prolactin release in the brain. Now, we know hexarelin and especially ipamorelin being even farther along. But hexarelin and ipamorelin, the scientists have pretty much removed that starvation mechanism, removed the negatives from these hormones. So GHRP6, GHRP2, and even MK677 is terrible with cortisol and prolactin release. However, with hexarelin and ipamorelin, prolactin release, cortisol and prolactin release is greatly decreased. And much more even with ipamorelin than hexarelin. This, I would argue, why ipamorelin also pulls a little bit higher or a little bit farther ahead. And cortisol is your body's stress hormone. You don't want that with building muscle. You don't want that with burning fat either. Prolactin, we can talk about prolactin for a long time, but prolactin, makes you lazy, lethargic, inhibits sexual function in both males and females. So that's a whole nother conversation, but all you need to know, guys, is honestly this. Hexarelin and ipamorelin are the best two in terms of cortisol and prolactin release, and ipamorelin is far better even than hexarelin. All right, just because the mechanism of binding to the pituitary with ipamorelin, again, it's a longer but slower pulse, which is not as intense or hard in the pituitary gland. Moving on in the pros. Or wait, we're done with the pros. Moving on to the cons. JK, we're done with the cons. Talking about dosage now. Moving into dosing. All right, guys, here's the fun one. All right? Here's the fun part of the video. Dosages for ipamorelin. Pay attention. 150 micrograms to 250 micrograms 5 times per week. 2 days off, Monday and Thursday. Let me say that again. Ipamorelin. What is the dosage? 150 to 250 micrograms 5 times a week, preferably Monday and Thursday off. If you want to take the weekend off, you can do that. But for maximal effect, I would do Monday and Thursday off of Ipamorelin, 150 to 250 micrograms. Now, this is not only my professional recommendation in terms of dosing. This is also the recommendation of what? All the doctors and the hormone replacement experts at Prometheus HRT. So this, in this case, again, or let's start with this. Do exactly what your doctor tells you. Having said that, my opinion, my professional opinion lines up exactly with the doctors on this. 150 to 250 micrograms 5 times a week for best case scenario, Monday and Thursday off. All right? Why? You're going to maximize pulses or growth hormone release. So altogether, you're going to do this to maximize growth hormone output, and you're also going to do this to minimize desensitization rate. And third, you're going to do this to minimize cortisol and prolactin increases. All right? So for the best bang per buck, 5 times per week. And yes, for those wondering, this is only once a day. All right? Now let's talk about what I'm doing. If you haven't watched my cycle video, what am I doing? I am currently prescribed pharmaceutical grade, prescription grade, Ipamorelin CJC 1295 no DAC combo. It comes in one vial, one combination vial. And I take 200 micrograms Ipamorelin, 200 micrograms CJC 1295 no DAC every day, 5 times a week with Monday and Thursday off. All right? So that's basically what I'm doing through my doctor with the prescription. And let me tell you, it's amazing. All right. You feel so much better. I cannot even tell you guys. If you have never used HGH, if you've never used pharmaceutical HGH or HGH peptides, then I can't describe to you how amazing HGH makes you feel. It's like pulling the reset button, putting you back to 18 years old. All right. Recovery's boosted, skin, hair, nails, everything's boosted. I'm gonna have to do an HGH Unleashed video. Makes you leaner, faster, stronger. HGH is not gonna make your muscle mass go through the roof like testosterone, but it's the recovery hormone. It makes you feel great, all right? And sleep is a huge benefit with HGH as well. Yeah, we'll do an HGH Unleashed video soon. But having said that, I wanna talk about this real quick. With Ipamorelin, it is entirely possible to use this at 300 micrograms per shot, taking a whopping dose of Ipamorelin. You could do this. However, if you're going to use Ipamorelin at 300 micrograms, one, you either have to be a large individual, or two, you want to be going from 5 times a week to 3 times a week. All right? So again, taking higher dosages, and at the same time, you're allowing more time to resensitize. So it's kind of like, again, you can take higher dosages to mimic Hexerol, we were talking about that. But the sweet spot, and again, I would tell most people, sweet spot is between 150 and 250 micrograms each dose once a day, 5 times a week, Monday, Thursday off, all right? And that's medical dosing. That's what again, my doctors are telling me to do. I agree with them completely, and that's the best case scenario. If you want the biggest bang per buck, build the most muscle, greatest growth hormone release, IGF-1, and fat loss. All right, moving on. And to address some people real quick, the reason you're not going to use Ipamorelin twice a day or 3 times a day, or the reason that you shouldn't use any growth hormone releasing peptide more than once a day, with maybe the rare exception of GHRP2, because of the short half-life, morning and evening. Why? Why do you want to stick to once a day? Any guesses? Here's the reason. You want to stick to once a day dosing because you need enough time to resensitize completely, even after one shot, one full shot, one good shot of GHRP6, GHRP2, Ipamorelin, Hexerol, you have desensitization. It just depends how much. So for the biggest bang per buck once a day, don't listen to these people that are saying more than once a day. That's not true. The longer the half-life and the more powerful, and the longer the half-life and also the more powerful it is, the more time you need to resensitize. Never multiple day dosing. That's garbage. All right, moving on into any extra additional information that you need to know. And we will close this video out. Here we go. Ipamorelin. Here's the bottom line, guys. More is not better. And when I say more is not better, I mean more is definitely not better. I just touched on this a little bit. You do not want to dose Ipamorelin, hexarelin, whatever, multiple times a day. If you do this, you might be able to get away with this for a few days, but what's going to happen? This is what your pulses are going to look like compared to what they should look like. You're going to be spiking up cortisol and prolactin, and your growth hormone release will be nothing, all right? Remember, you got to remember this. You're not taking synthetic HGH. You're taking something to stimulate the pituitary release of HGH, all right? So more is definitely not better at all, unless, and here's the exception with that, unless, let's say you want to take 300 micrograms, 350 micrograms even of Ipamorelin, or you want to take hexarelin. Is more better? Well, I guess it would be if you're giving your body, if you're only taking it 2 or 3 times a week. But in terms of what's the best thing to do? More times per week, lower amounts, or not using hexarelin, okay? Why? Because you can use it every day, almost every day. You know, I train 5 to 6 times a week. I can use it pretty much every day around my workout for recovery, muscle building, and to just smash those receptor sites with HGH, versus if I did 2 or 3 times a week, only half of my workouts I would get that HGH release around. So in terms of muscle building and also fat loss, because I do cardio around my weights too, start out with some cardio almost as a warm-up, then I go and I smash weights. So for muscle building and fat burning and also recovery, a lot of people don't know what that means nowadays, Ipamorelin is going to beat out hexarelin. Again, all day, every day, in terms of that. All right, this has got to be said. I'm going to close with this. This is a fun one. Here we go, guys. Ipamorelin is my favorite peptide, growth hormone releasing peptide. Ipamorelin is my absolute favorite. I love it. It's awesome. And for all the reasons I already explained, it is the best in my book. And if you want the best quality Ipamorelin growth hormone releasing peptides, pharmaceutical grade, prescription grade from a doctor with stabilizing agents, which you can go online and order Ipamorelin off of research sites. You know, if you order them off of the research sites, guess what? They're not going to be putting in stabilizing agents. But anyways, if you want Ipamorelin, prescription grade, pharmaceutical grade with stabilizing agents so they don't go bad, you can go to Prometheus HRT, sign up. It'll take you 15 minutes. And as long as you qualify, which should not be hard, you can get Ipamorelin with CJC in a prescription vial, the same as I do. And you can take my exact same cycle for that matter. Guys, that's pretty much it. That is Ipamorelin unleashed like you've never heard it before. I'm Seth Spartan. Stay safe, stay healthy, do everything legally, safely through your doctor, and we are out of here.